Good morning. Ooh. Good morning. All right, I'll take that. I am so excited to be kicking off my Saturday here with you. I can think of literally no better way to do it. Campus chapters, She's the First Scholars, Girls Education Advocates, a conference because I'm a giant dork, and a panel to kick off the day on, of course, girls' education. So, I'd like to bring up two panelists who are, honestly, two of the leading experts in this field, and two people that I look up to a lot. So, our first panelist today is an acclaimed global advocate for girls' education, a girl champion, and development expert. He co-founded and is the executive director of Purposeful Productions, which is a new movement-building hub for adolescent girls in the global south. And as a teenager, he founded and then led Sierra Leone's first children's parliament, no big deal. He's also worked with UNFPA, Catholic Relief Services, Nike Foundation, and previously he was on the Population Council leading an initiative to provide solutions to adolescent girls affected by the Ebola crisis. So I'd like to invite Chernor to the stage. Now, our next panelist joined the Population Council in 1977, which means that she was Chernor's former boss for a while. She's a senior associate in policy analysis with the Council's Poverty, Gender, and Youth program, and has changed the way the world thinks about the quality of care from the client's perspective, that's the girl's perspective, and the power and potential of the poorest, most excluded girls. She recently served as co-chair of the UN expert group meeting on the elimination of all forms of discrimination and violence against the girl child, and honestly, she's kind of who I want to be when I grow up. So, Judith Bruce, will you please come out? Okay, so let's talk about why this matters. Tell me, why is girls' education the most critical issue of our time? Chernor, you want to kick off?
Oh, wow, okay. Well, just to say what a delight to be here, and particularly to be next to these two amazing women. What Christen didn't say is that I also look up to her and Tammy, and I've learned a lot from her over the years, and Judith is not my former boss. I met Judith 11 years ago, and from the day I met her, I was not working for her at the time, but she became my boss, and I know she will be for the rest of my life. So that's what Judith does to you. Once you're in her wings, you never leave. So I was saying to Christen just before we got up here that I actually feel a little intimidated. You know, I've been on many panels in my life, but just looking here in the room and seeing all this girl power energy coming out, I'm like, I want to, I have to step up my game. And then Christen gave me the first question. Why girls' education is important? Look, I believe that girls' education is the civil rights issue of our time. It's the most important issue we have to tackle. I come from a country, Sierra Leone, which is a very poor country. And I have seen time and again in conflicts, in poverty, that there's a very, very strong correlation between the empowerment of girls through education and poverty and conflict. So the best possible, as Judith will say, and this is something I learned from her, the best way to plan for poverty is to not empower girls through education. And you look at, in some of the districts in Sierra Leone, 40% of girls out of school between the ages of 10 and 12. That's why my country is poor. So if a girl is educated, we know that she is much more likely to be to not only support herself, but to support the community that she lives in, to also empower people around her. And when you empower girls, when you give girls the tools to not only thrive, and by the way, I think Christen and I talk about this a lot, one of the big problems is that we treat education in isolation when it comes to girls' lives. it's not just about giving her the tools to go to school, because for a girl, the complexities are much more than that. It's about supporting her through that school, through mentorship, making sure she has access to reproductive health services, making sure she has access to 5 Friends, what we talk about at the Population Council and also at She's the First. So the way our society is structured over time, especially in poor countries and even here, it's structured to systematically leave girls behind. If you build it if you just build a school, like I just came from Sierra Leone and I was in some very poor districts, just because there are schools does not mean girls can come. Just because there are teachers does not mean that girls have access to the school. Because for girls, there are a lot of inbuilt obstacles that prevent her from coming to school. If it's pregnancy, it's marriage, it's the road to school, it's the danger, and all of those things. So there's a systematic structure that prevent girls from going to school. And I think our cause is to fight to overcome those obstacles and give girls the tools to get education, because that's the most important, as well, Nelson Mandela famously said, is the most important tool we have to defeat poverty.
Judith, would you like to add anything?
Chernor has said it beautifully. I think the origins of poverty and much of the driving inequality in the world is what happens to girls between the ages of 10 and 14. So when we talk about girls' education, maybe the broader subject is investments in girls, of which education is central, and it's the officially acknowledged policy. But the metrics around it have distorted its potential. If you look at a country like Liberia or even Sierra Leone, you'll see high proportions of girls and boys vaccinated by age 5, and that's seen as a success. And then the next metric of success will be the proportion of pregnant girls who got all their prenatal care, which in the case of Liberia is 90%. The problem is they're pregnant, and the other problem is what Chernor alluded to, is between 10 and 14, a very high proportion go off track. Even if they're in school, they're many grades behind. And that means that not only are they not actually in a peer group, there's this heterogeneous group in the classroom, but it also means that the message is already there, that this really isn't something that they can use, that they are part of sufficiently. The didactic power of the schools is reduced, and their eyes are already on a horizon and not a high horizon. Governments forever have assumed they could put girls on the education train at 6 and take them off at 16, and they could get a job. Now that doesn't happen pretty much anywhere, and it certainly happens less and less. So it has been the only policy on the books for that age group, and it must be expanded to include much larger content, financial literacy, a much greater consciousness of the livelihood roles that girls will play. I'll talk about that a bit later. And also the tremendously important role of social capital, 5 friends and a place to meet them. It's just, could anybody in this room get through the decision, with all the information in the world, can you get through difficult decisions without 5 friends? Raise your hand if you can. Yeah, it's bedrock throughout your entire life. So 5 friends and a place to meet them is pretty much the most important support we all need to make use of everything, including our education.
Absolutely. In the AV booth, we're getting a little bit of feedback up here, so if you can adjust, that would be amazing. So I want to talk about the name of this panel is around the newest trends in girls' education, but I think maybe the world hasn't done the best job of implementing even the old trends in education and the research that has been coming out. And so my next question is, what are some examples of programming changes you think we should have already seen a long time ago?
Well, the mantra was get girls to school on time and keep them there, and that's a good mantra. What has not been appreciated is the social support both within the schools. I'm a big fan of sex segregation for ages 10 to 14. I see no downside for girls or for boys. It's a time of sensitivity, and so it's interesting. I remember World Bank missions and people saying, well, of course it's modern, but if you look at what happens to girls during puberty and boys, they have a lot more social power. At least they have that, but there's no downside. So I'd like to see people re-examine the potential of female-only and male-only spaces for socialization during those years. Obviously, the addition of real-time understanding of the economies that they're in, both the growing inequality in almost every country, some of the new layers, like access to energy, which then frame education. In Sierra Leone, where Chernor and I've learned a huge amount. By the way, he doesn't ever have a boss, so you have to get that out of your mind. No, but imagine the energy grid, and unless you create study spaces so that you can, girls as soon as they leave school, if they've had the luck to get there, are going back to a situation of perpetual work and demands on their time. And there are even places that when they're in school, they're then asked to clean up the classroom before they leave. Basically, your female role never leaves you. You get them on a sports team, and the boys are handing them the pennies. Okay, you've got to create a female-only space. In places with challenged energy, and it's pretty much global, by the way. I mean, 14% of Native American homes don't have the energy level. So this is global. The disparities are global. But I think one of the things we need to do is create girl-only study spaces, which will also be huge empowerment zones. And also a platform. Another Ebola crisis, vaccine, where are you going to deliver it? So those are some of the things I've added, and much more attention to supporting female teachers, making it possible for them to do their job in difficult circumstances, building their social capital, grouping and clustering. Chernor and I were just talking about some possibilities in Sierra Leone of fielding teachers in groups to the tough areas, because living while girl or living while young woman are very challenging.
Yeah, and I think all of these solutions, we often think about them happening in the context of these huge international organizations, right? So it's kind of, we think about the UNICEFs of the world, say, right? And we think about these solutions that are happening kind of at this very high level. So research comes out. Ideally, these organizations are picking up that research, and they're going to implement changes in programming through that research. But what I would love to touch on, is when it comes to local contexts and local actors, this is something that we know to be critical to the success of girls' education as a movement, women's empowerment, women's equality as a movement. Can you share with us some of the work that's been happening on a more local level and local context, and why you think that that's important?
Thank you. Well, I believe that this movement, and I refer to, and I think Judith and I like to talk about girls' education as a civil rights issue, and it's deliberate, because we think you need the kind of infrastructure that you had with the civil rights issue. And because you're actually fighting against a structure that is dedicated to keeping girls out of school, and that's dedicated structurally, politically, there's so many barriers against girls. For this movement to succeed, we need to go beyond what the international organizations do. And oftentimes we hear a lot about what the big organizations do, and I have to give a shout out here to She's the First, because I know that part of the work that we do at She's the First is finding out local partners in these countries who are at the grassroots, who are actually making the change. And that's the critical part. Unfortunately, we don't hear a lot about these organizations, and there's a reason, because they don't have the voice, they don't have the resources, oftentimes, even in these countries. But identifying who these partners are. Because I was just showing Judith pictures of, last week I was in Sierra Leone with my new organization, and we're trying to go into places where no NGO is. So we want to work in communities where there's never been an NGO. And to think about a country like Sierra Leone, where we've had an influx of NGOs, where there's big international NGOs, we have the largest UN peacekeeping mission in the world at some point. And yet, in some of the most isolated places, there's never been a single NGO dealing with the issues that we care about. Girls' education, nobody cares about that. It's not fancy enough, because it's hard for them to tick off a list. Because you're not gonna, as Judith was saying, if it's just providing vaccination, that's easy, you can count. We've just provided vaccination for this number of people, and then donors want to see that as on their success list. But what happened, the change that needs to happen, and the critical partners in this fight are the ones in the local communities, and in some cases it's the chief, the first female paramount chief in this chiefdom where we went to, who tells us that what she's doing is organizing study groups, is organizing other women in the community. It's the groups that we work with, young females who are between the ages of 18 and 24, who come together and organize mentor clubs and provide girls with these 5 friends that Judith talks about, this power group. You know, to put the context of the power of having 5 friends, to put it in context, is, I like to use this analogy. When we commit a crime or when somebody does something terrible, what do? We isolate them, right? We take you away. That's the punishment, right? For many girls in these communities, that's their reality. They are taught to be afraid of other girls. You can't hang out with other girls because they are bad. You know, you have to go to school and come back and do your chores. You always have to be busy. And so they're caught of that power that you get from being in a social group. And there are a lot of small local organizations that are committed to doing work like this. And in Sierra Leone, for example, we have a group. We formed the Sierra Leone Adolescent Girls Network, and it's a model that now we're seeing other countries learn from. I was just in Indonesia a few months ago where they want to learn about what we're doing there. In Liberia, we set up something similar. In Haiti, we have work going around there as well. When we're bringing together local actors, just local organizations who have little money, who are in places that are not fancy, that you don't put on these beautiful reports all the time, but are doing the hard, dirty work, putting girls in groups, helping them to study, creating study groups at night, helping them to understand, as Judith was saying, financial literacy, that they are themselves economic agents. Because some of the problems that girls face oftentimes is once the first stress hits, then they have nothing, they have no resources. So what ends up happening is their body is all they have. And because that's the currency that the society insists on, because that's all the society sees, and if that's all they have as well, that's what they have to trade in. So giving them the tools to be able to overcome these. And we see a lot of small grassroots organizations doing the unspoken dirty work, and I think that's the kind of work that needs to happen. And we need to organize and link these organizations and these groups, these young female mentors. These, in one of the communities I was in, the only girl that made it through grade 10, and she was in the village there helping to organize other girls, because now she's married, but she made it to grade 10, and we want to make sure that that alone is being seen as an achievement and help to empower other girls as well, so that they can get to her stage and move one stage forward. So that's the kind of slow, dedicated work that we need to do, and that local grassroots groups are doing, and that's moving the envelope forward, and I think that needs to happen to keep this movement forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the local actors being willing to do the dirty work, which I think in a lot of ways is really just a way of saying complex work. You know, and you mentioned earlier about kind of this donor checklist, right? So if I'm doing vaccinations, I can check off I've given 50 vaccinations. But these themes make me think of how donors really love to have the simple solution, right? And to kind of to plug this easy thing in. And once large groups of people grasp onto a narrative, it takes off. And one of the things this reminds me of is the Population Council did a study a few years ago on bathrooms for girls. And often in the girls' education space, we're told, you know, if you have a gender-specific bathroom for girls that is clean for them to be able to take care of menstruation, then you cut absentee rates. This is just a given, right? Have you all heard this before? Right? Raise your hand if you've heard this. It's false. Can you tell us?
Well, I mean, obviously, let's make a distinction. On the one hand, everyone has rights and needs, so there should be bathrooms for girls. And one of the problems right now, for the many problems of the 800,000 Syrian adolescent girls who are refugees, is that in Lebanon and other places where they don't have schooling options, they've locked the bathrooms. They've created sessions, they've locked the bathrooms. So I'm for bathrooms. I'm for young women being able to both respect and feel proud of their bodies. But what the grip you're in is a system, and it's more like the civil rights movement. It's not, there's obviously individual dimensions to this, but we have to look at the long-term system. The pathway to success, if you define it, in being able to have the knowledge you need to craft a proud livelihood and control your income and invest the results of your efforts, whether it's materially in cash or otherwise, would be my benchmark of success. And where education fits in is curious. Level 1, you want girls to be able to have the knowledge to, as I said, be proud of and control their bodies. But they're in an economic paradigm, and very, very young, they're under tremendous sexual pressure. direct or indirect, in many circumstances, even here in the United States, and certainly accelerated in a very dismal way by social media. Exploitation and empowerment have become confused. So proud control of self and the information. Then you get filled up with information. Your human stock gets built through education. If you're female, getting there, staying there, having the support you need to absorb and practice. Another big challenge, and now we have two more. Once you leave school, and we have very interesting data from Malawi, you de-learn, you lose those skills faster than boys do by a long shot. You have them at the same level, by the way. You have them at the same level. But my hypothesis is that because there's no space to practice them in, and you can't craft a livelihood, if you can't, going in individually selling a fish, I'll give you an example. You go sell a fish. There's a scarcity of fish in Lake Victoria. The person selling to you has control over you, not just the price, but your body. You need teams, you need a teaming approach to livelihoods, among other things. So you've been through school. In order to find safe livelihoods, you still are going to need lots of social capital and expanded livelihoods. So now you have the ability, you have the resources, but you either can't get to the opportunity structures, or if you get to them, next problem, they take your money away. You have to plan for any asset you give a female, you have to figure out who wants it and how to prevent them. So money in female hands is worth 10 to 20 times income in male hands in terms of positive and intergenerational investment, education, environment, health, and so forth. It's extremely powerful. That money is often taken away from females because 4%, I'll give you an example, in Bangladesh, garment workers have to have at least 8 years of education. There are 1.2 million garment workers, 90% are female, they're between the ages of 16 and 24. Only 4% have formal bank accounts. So next challenge, I'm working, I have resources, how do I control them? And the last challenge, and this is the biggest one, and the one I think this is a driver of poverty we must pay great attention to. Even when you have increased the female return on their effort. When I graduated from college in the United States, it was 62 cents on the male dollar, controlling for everything. It's now, I think, about 88 cents. That sounds better, but here's what's not better. A very high proportion, half of you, will be single mothers. I've been a single mother, and will have, in any case, substantial or sole responsibility for dependence. As fertility falls, you have the children. You're looking after children. You're looking after grandchildren. You're looking after older grandparents, because now all these health benefits and survival rates mean that there's a rising group. So females then may have 88 cents when they had 62, but they had 2 dependents and now they have 6. What makes women poor is the disproportionate direct caring and financial burden for others. That's the biggie, and that's where all these policies on health care, all these policies on social support networks, that drives female poverty, and education cannot make a difference unless we can we can change those policies. And Chernor remembers very well in the case of Sierra Leone, during Ebola, 18,000 girls got pregnant. The president said it was 3,000. We wrote him a letter, and the first line of it says, "You just plan poverty," because he said he wanted to keep the girls out of school because they were these, despicably pregnant, as if they did it by themselves, by the way. And we modeled what would that mean for Sierra Leone? Okay, so a girl who was allowed to return to school would have fewer children. The partnership she established would be more voluntary. The additional time she spent in school would translate into 10 to 20% more in terms of earnings for her. She's not still making enough, but she's making more than she would have. And she would have responsibility. Now, if 75% of the girls in Sierra Leone will be single mothers, which is the case, and 92% in Liberia, most of it arising through divorce, abandonment, and so forth. So there's a period of your life you're going to be a single mother. Just, go with it. It's going to happen, right? Or sole support. We modeled this and came back and said, if you let the girls stay in school, you will have, instead of 78,000 children born of them, you'll have 37,000. and their maternal resources, which are the key resources, there'll be 4 times as many maternal resources for those children. It had never been framed that way for him. Education is still seen as a social nicety. It's actually part of a strategy to alleviate poverty and fulfill rights.
We keep talking around social capital and that idea for girls, but I think, can we take just 1 minute to illustrate what is social capital and how does that play out for a girl in these contexts?
What is social capital? It's, as I said, I like to talk about my own family sometimes, yeah? I have the privilege of having 2 sisters. I was the only boy. My sisters, and again, this is with the exception, because my family, both of my parents are educated, both of my parents were teachers. But in a context like Sierra Leone, at the end of the school day, I am expected to go out and play. Even if I come home to help, I am told that a boy should not be in the kitchen. By the way, I'm married now and I know how to cook, so that's not a problem. I refuse that. But you're told as a boy, you can go out, you can have friends, you're allowed to be out, you're allowed to stand up and speak, you're allowed to have confidence, to be in the youth club, to be in the youth space that's in the community, you can go there. But I remember when I met Judith 10 years ago, she and I went to a center in Liberia, and they had this massive youth center. It was a beautiful center. And we were there, and they were supposed to be serving. We asked the people who run it, is this girl-friendly? They're like, yeah, girls can come. But in the youth center, it was all boys. They were playing, they were playing games, they were having huge arguments about sports and that kind of stuff. And there were 2 girls in the back who were sitting in the corner. And they were there for the reproductive health services that were being offered. So oftentimes, in the services that are offered, girls come, and we've done studies of this at the Pop Council, girls come to these services only when they are already in trouble. So we call them ambulance services. The services that are intended to build your human capital, your self-confidence, play, just having a friend, just having somebody to talk to, just having somebody to hang around with, right? For girls, typically in this context, they are either forbidden or they're extremely dangerous. My new organization, when we started about 6 months ago, we were doing some preliminary studies, and we went to communities in Sierra Leone, and we were asking local group leaders, identify for us 4 or 5 places in this community where boys, we started asking, boys will generally meet, just boys around the same age on their own, and they'll just hang out, and it will be fine. It's not forbidden, it's permitted, and it's safe, right? The football field, the game show, where they play the sports, all of these places, it's okay. For girls, there's not a single space where girls will tell you confidently that they can meet and they feel confident and it's not forbidden. If they have to come together, it's oftentimes at the waterside. That's where they go to fetch water. So that's where, but again, that's not for fun. It's not for recreation. They have to go and they have to come back in time. If they're not come back, there's an issue. Now, the issue with this is if you don't have, again, there's tons of studies that we've done that they did at the Pop Council, and I used to work at the Pop Council until earlier this year, that show a very strong correlation, for example, on using contraceptives, right? Girls with friends are much more likely, 2 to 3 times more likely, to use contraceptives than girls who don't have friends. It's as simple as that. If you have somebody to talk to, among married girls in Ethiopia, if you're married and you're in a married girls club and you can talk about it and you can learn from the other person, that reinforcement, that having that group and having that friend helps you. They're less likely to be victims of abuse. They're much more likely to control pregnancies. So there's a very, very strong correlation between, but I think at the end of the day, it's on the most human level. Think about it, as Judith said. If you did not have the friends that you have, if you all think about the anxiety we all face when we walk into a room where we don't know anybody. Think about the anxiety we face when we go to a school or a new community where we don't know anybody, where nobody wants to be friends with us. So just that. And that's the reality of a lot of girls growing up in these contexts. They are forbidden from having friends, and the structures are so designed to fill their day up with chores and things and just the demands on them that they do not have the time to be able to have friends and to thrive.
Well, and not only that, but Population Council has also done a lot of studies on blockable communities, right? And this idea that as a girl gets older, she goes from childhood to young adolescence, the amount of space that she has that is safe for her to walk and permitted for her to walk in her community gets smaller, right? Where for boys...
Dramatically, it shrinks dramatically. And it's part of what I was saying just now, where as a boy, right, my sisters and I, we start at the same baseline, right? When we're young, we can all, we go to school, we come back and everything. But at a certain age, when my sisters hit puberty around age 12, what happens is their social space shrinks. My mom is now worried about the road to school because there are boys there. Even in school, it becomes less safe for my sisters because the male teachers, and I was just saying, we have communities in Sierra Leone where you have there's been a school in one of the communities I just came back from. There's been a school for 11 years. It's a high school, and they have never had a single female teacher. The people most responsible for impregnating the girls are the teachers. So yes, some of the fears that the parents have are not unfounded, right? But what happens is when they do these special studies where you can track where a boy feels safe versus where a girl feels safe, whereas for the boy, as you hit in puberty, that space expands because now I can walk, I can go to the field, I can go ride bikes and things like that. Whereas for the girl, it shrinks dramatically. And that has, as I've just pointed out, some very serious consequences on your personal development and your ability to access other services within your community.
Yeah, so we often think about a scholarship, for example, money to go to school as this kind of end-all be-all, right? It's as if, okay, I'm going to lay down the funds that a girl needs to go to school, and from that point forward, she's good. Life is made, she's got it, good job, pat on the back, great. Clearly not true. What are some of the other obstacles that she's going to face along the way?
Well, I think you're talking about an issue of, what's the theory of change. And the theory of change has been that somehow you make an individual investment. And for a person with sort of a more friendship networks and support for study and all, the individual scholarship may get them somewhere. But unless the place they're living in changes, they'll be leaving there. So some of the most successful programs will find that the girls that were invested in were the most likely to leave. So I certainly promote, the idea of changing, and what Chernor is describing is, first you pick the places. Where are the places with the highest concentrations of those at the greatest risk of the worst human rights abuses at the youngest ages? And the places that people don't go to. So one of the challenges we have to many of the organizations is first pick where you're working and go to the hot spots. We know it's really convenient here. I live down in Tribeca. Yes, I could find some poor girls in Tribeca, but it would be much more, and you can do this analysis in any of the countries that you're working in. By the way, I urge your chapters to perhaps even pick a country you're going to study, because the complexity we're kind of modeling here begins to have a real reality when you pick a country and look at the different levels exactly. So use the information to go deep. Get to the places where the highest proportions of girls face the highest risks. And that information, by the way, I'm happy to report, you've got a lot of information and new things we can add, like access to electricity, like poor banking. Get to those places. In those places, reach a threshold proportion of girls, because you're intervening in a sexual marketplace. This is not an individual story. The age at marriage, the amount of education will vary directly with the pressures of the sexual marketplace, because for females, I have to do this with my hands and put the microphone down. Sexual markets and labor markets are like this. A female's sexual life determines her economic life. Now, they're not disconnected. That's important to understand. So if you want something to change, you need to reach a threshold proportion of girls. So clustering activities. Now we're in a place, we just did some work in Haiti. We're in a place where in a walking community, there were 2,400 girls between the ages of 6 and 17. 40% of them by age 14 were already living apart from both parents, or out of school, or had a baby, or were married. right? And that's a very demanding standard. If we added then those living with a single parent, that means a woman under stress usually, this goes up to close to 70%, right? A program is operating there that is reaching 200 girls. That's a lot of girls, it seems, but it's only 8% of those. And the next question we asked was, which girls are they reaching? The small group of girls, 15 to 17, living with both parents and in school, had a 1 in 3 chance of being in that program, 30% of them. None of the girls, the 102 girls with babies in walking distance, were in the program. Now, that program's a good program, but it needs to reset its strategy. And it needs to understand that who's not there tells them a lot about their strategy. Why did I not find these girls? And then be realistic. A very successful program in Uganda by most measures still found that the girls that they had in their program, and they'd reached 40% of the girls in the community, but they'd reached the top 40%. And this increased the chance they would migrate out. That's, of course, their right. But we need to simultaneously, this is my little phrase, support girls and make them safe, happy, and productive, being who they are, not somebody else. They don't really need the spandex genes. They need to be proud of who they are, where they are. We have to make their communities places they can choose to stay.
Okay, so we're starting to run out of time, but there's one question I definitely want to hit on, because I think pretty much everyone in this room considers themselves to some extent to be an advocate and activist for girls' education. Am I about right? Yeah, I'm about right. And so I think, we can't have this conversation with every person that we meet on the street. But there is kind of a dominant narrative around girls' education and girls' empowerment. So for the final question before we open it up to the audience, I'd like to know, what are some of the changes you'd like to see in that message of girls' education, the power of girls' education, kind of the current marketing that's happening now? What would you like to change, if anything, or what would you like that message to be?
I'll go first. So part of my new initiative, Purposeful Productions, that's actually one of the things we're interested in tackling, is telling a different story about what needs to be done about girls' lives, particularly in the developing world. And in my background in the past few years, I've done a lot of work with the United Nations, with the Malala movement, on trying to really call for investments in girls' education. And so one of the things that often bothers me, and I think it's something we've talked about, and you see the reality of this on the ground, is that for girls especially, just building the school or just a scholarship is not sufficient. And it's not just about trying to now, don't get me wrong, we want the school, we want the scholarships if we can have them. But that's not the only thing that's going to make a difference in her life. And by the way, I think the simple way I put it is to treat interventions in girls' lives, especially in poor countries, when you're talking about education and the outcome for her, as holistic, to use an overused NGO term. But to think about her as a person, and to think about everything that person will need for her to succeed and to thrive. So if you are an NGO and come in and you say, look, the only thing I'm going to do is I'm providing scholarships and you get to go to school. And by the way, a lot of NGOs, a lot of scholarship programs, they put an additional burden on the girl. If she fails, she's out. If she gets pregnant, she's out. Because the paradigm, and this is what Judith alluded to, is that education is some kind of social privilege. It's some kind of privilege. You have to earn it, right? This is why when you get pregnant in Sierra Leone, the government says, Baka, that's it. You're done. You're out of school. In Tanzania now, by the way, we were fighting against the government of Sierra Leone, and I remember I was on all the media calling my government so bad and backward, and Tanzania thought they're going to up that. They said, if you get pregnant, you're never coming back to school ever. Full stop. That's it. That's the way that education has been viewed, especially for girls, that somehow the responsibility and the burden is on her. What needs to change is to think about all the barriers that she faces, to think about her as a person. She needs all of these other things to thrive in school. The bathroom, yes, it's important, but her friends, a female teacher, a mentor, what she needs as a person to thrive and to survive in the community that she is in. And I think that's the kind of paradigm that we need to think about. What kind of interventions, what kind of actions that we need to take. And I have to, again, come back to the model that She's the First has and that Christen has been championing. That we look at the girl as a person within her community and think about placing her in a group where she has a mentor, where she has a female teacher, where sometimes she links up and she sees the world beyond her, where you provide other things for her life, helping her, for example, to understand financial literacy, to understand that she's an economic agent, to help her to think about access to solar energy, to solar power, so that she can have access to those things. Because if you don't deal with all of those things, you're essentially just pouring water on what they say on dog's back. Because at the end of the day, even if you focus too much on the education, this is what the world did with the MDGs. They said, we just get children into school, get children into school, get children into school. What we ended up having was exactly what Judith was talking about, the low-hanging fruits. Yes, there will be people that are in Tribeca that are not in school, that have some issues, and so you just take them and get them into school, but that's good. But the people that are in the rural areas and conflict-affected areas, the girls that don't have access to the things we just talked about, those girls are still left out because the paradigm was just build a school and get her into it, but not think about her as a person and everything that she's going to need to survive and thrive in that school.
Just a few things to add. I think the key is females being able to be with females like them. So a girl by age, a girl that's out of school needs a place with girls like her for onboarding or any other. So a safe and supportive space with females who are like her throughout her life, by the way. I think it's a lifetime resource that's vital. And even the economic models of Asia, the credit groups, the first innovation was not the banking model, it was the social model of bringing females together. That's essential. That's our core loss. The scale plan for society is the social isolation of females so they can be controlled. That's the feminist part of your T-shirt. So that structure then is a resource for the entire community. Who's going to be in communities the longest? Is it the 22-year-old guy or it's the 14-year-old girl? It's the 14-year-old girl. She'll be there in 10 years. So any investment you make in her, particularly in this run-up to puberty, which is so vital, will stay there. And any deficit will also stay there. So I would say the bedrock investment is in girls 10 to 14 across their health, social, economic, and cognitive, meaning skill-building resources. Concentrated in communities which have become marginalized initially because they actually are prepared to see. It's why our work in Ethiopia scaled so rapidly, because they knew that child marriage was related to HIV, which was already more female than male there. They understood it was part of their poverty. But it wasn't an individual matter, it was a community matter as well. Groups were formed for girls in different categories. That's a standing resource for the girls. It's a standing resource for their families. It's a standing platform for all the things we hope we can produce, like an HIV vaccine, like how are you going to reach these people? And it has a permanence in the community. Otherwise, the only thing that's permanent is poverty. So I would use the word investments in girls, enough investments in enough girls early enough to make a difference. And core in all of that is facing the economic realities. We have unprecedented drivers of inequality between countries, within countries, and so forth. And it's these places, the kind that Chernor is talking about. We really aren't even looking at national problems anymore. We're looking at enclaves, refugee enclaves in this country, Native Americans in this country who haven't got their fair share, African Americans in this country who certainly have faced tremendous, discrimination and economic exclusion. And in every country in the world, the information exists to say, here are the places we should be working, but begin with those with the greatest challenges. And the good part of that is, particularly if you're activists, is that's where the needle moves. The needle doesn't move on the better off girl who already has 2 friends, she'll get 5. The needle moves on the girl who goes from 0 to 10. And you can, each of you, I'm convinced, each of you could take a project and a place and say, I'm going to learn a great deal about it. I'm going to find a way to make a difference there.
Because it trickles up, doesn't trickle down.
Everything you give to someone at the bottom goes, a girl at the bottom goes up. Nothing you give from the top trickles down. So it is also the best portal for innovation that you can possibly find.
And the good news is that a lot of that research and information is on Pop Council's website. Okay, so we do have time for a few questions, maybe two. I think the way this is going to work is that Brooke is going to come around. Go ahead.
Hi, I don't know if this is my name is Mary Beth. I actually work for the Center for Women's Global Leadership, and we run the 16 Days campaign. And our theme this year is around violence in education. And what we've been finding from talking to some of our partners is one of the biggest factors in violence for girls in education comes from the teachers within the schools. And I know you brought up like female teachers. I'm wondering from your experience if that has decreased at levels, what protections you offer to those teachers, or should be offered to those teachers, since I know they're probably also very young and vulnerable, and especially in situations where there's higher levels of discrimination. So you mentioned Syrians in Lebanon, and that's something close to my heart from work I've done. And we found that there was a lot of hatred, especially against young girls there. So in bringing together this holistic quality education, you can have, like we said, the building of the schools, the scholarships, and even the social support. But if that's a big factor in prohibiting access, how can that be addressed also? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joanne Jung. I'm from Wellesley College. One thing that seems to be, like you said, an integral part of these interventions is local and community participation. But in countries that don't involve girls and women in education, don't because perhaps it is a threat or it is an economic investment that they have to make. So my question is how do we go about approaching local communities that don't want to take part in this if local grassroots is kind of the main solution, I guess, for education for girls and women in these countries?
I'll answer the parts of the questions, which are multiphasic. Let me begin with the first on community, and I think Chernor alluded. Much of what's called community dialogue is not community dialogue. It basically, you always have to begin with those who are most empowered, but you have to recognize they're gatekeepers, they're not your clients. So I would say to both of these, the cavalry is there. The people you want to work with are there, but you've got to give them space to come forward. In the same Liberia visit, I remember going, it was a community affected by HIV, and the HIV club came forward, and it was sort of 5 guys in loincloths. I don't know what they were doing, gymnastics. And then there were 5 girls behind them who were asked to shimmy, and I was the external donor who was supposed to be like thrilled. And I was surprised that we hadn't had pregnancies right there at the rally. And, and I said I'd like to talk to all the 14-year-old girls that were here. Well, there were like 3 huddled in the back. A lot of these processes enforce exclusion and actually sexualization. So let's be conscious and honest about that. Our best weapon is clarity of vision and honesty, and creating a space where our core clients, in my case, let's say the 10 to 14-year-old girls, have a place to validate. With privacy, by the way. They need privacy, and we haven't mentioned that enough. Any low-power group needs privacy. You can't do strategy without privacy. So the safe and supportive spaces have to let you have to be able to say how you really feel without consequence. It's absolutely vital. In the case of Lebanon and Syria and so forth, and I used to live in Lebanon long ago, but I visited the sites there, the foundations of an educational process are in creating social groupings of girls. And we shouldn't get too stuck on bricks and mortar. School is a space where you learn. So if you wait for the bricks and mortar, you'll be waiting a long time. But there has to be a buy-in that females get their own space. I'm sorry to keep going back to this and back to this and back to this. Now from that, things emerge. In Burkina Faso, among married girls, these are girls, I don't use the word marriage. And girls forced into sexual activity very early with people called partners. We shouldn't call them partners. Any case, in Burkina, which has very high maternal mortality, we went to the place with the highest maternal mortality. Girls in their first pregnancy in this particular community were set to labor by themselves in the fields, and if they survived that, then there were various, kind of traditional things that also fostered infection. So the first thing was just healthful circumstances. After we had the meeting after a while, and initially it took 2 workers going in, and one would work with the girl and one would work with the family, but after about 3 visits, then the girls came out on their own. Within 2 months, they had their own space, and with 2 months after that, they had their own school. You set and train. They want to learn. They want to be with each other. We're holding it back. So let's just unleash it purposefully. We'll get schooling, learning, investment opportunities out of it.
Well, what I would say to the second question around how do you get local communities, this is some of the things that we have been occupied with in the past few years, is how do we engage with local groups. And I think we alluded to that earlier on. At the end of the day, most of the narratives as well around girls' education is, you should do it because it feels good. And people like to do these beautiful pictures and say, oh, you got to get the girls to go to school. We move away from that. We want to move to the more factual discussion. You're poor because your girls are not in school. That's an argument that people can get behind. We can break it down for you like we did for the president of Sierra Leone. I had a chance to meet with him one-on-one. I said, Mr. President, do you know what this means? This is the real number. It's 175,000 children, or 75,000 children versus 35,000 children. It's 200,000 more in your GDP versus 200,000 less in your GDP. For a minute, he was like, wow, nobody ever broke it down for me like this. And when we meet with local chiefs, this is also part of the problem. Most of the times in development, people just come and say, we have a scholarship scheme, we're going to come into this community and we're going to pick 5 girls and give them scholarships, and that's it. I was talking to some of my friends in the private sector. I used to work for Nike, and they said, nobody will start a business without doing a proper baseline. But in development, we all go into communities and we all do things without understanding what the context is, what the implications are, what the investment should be, like what's your baseline, who are you going to be able to reach. And in the communities where we work, this is exactly what we're trying to do. At the Pop Council, we develop tools that help us to, first of all, understand the community. By the time I go to meet with the paramount chiefs that I'm meeting with now in my program, I have a map of the community. I know how many girls are in there. I know how many girls are out of school. I know what the implication is going to be for my program. And when I'm talking to that chief, I'm talking from a position of authority and say, let's bring in the leaders in this community. And oftentimes you find a place where they agree. There's going to be something that they want, There's going to be, we want to see this change. Well, then, if you want to see this change, these are the things that we need to do to engage in. I just want to allude quickly to the question of protection of female teachers. It's a huge issue. In some of the communities where we work, they're so isolated. I just mentioned one place where I went, where none of the girls, even though there's a school there, no girl has ever made it past 10th grade. And the school has been open, for example, for 11 years, and there's not been a single female teacher. And before we came on stage, I was just telling Judith I want to sit down with her to map out a new scheme that we want to fund to help link females in groups to go into communities where there are no female teachers. It's like, in the studies we've just done in Sierra Leone, in places where we work, it's a very, very strong correlation between the presence of strong female teachers in the schools and the retention of girls in those schools. Because there's a whole culture thing as well in the schools where the teachers feel free to go after the girls, impregnate them, and all of that. But to make that work, to your point around protection, we have to, again, have a deal with the chiefs. We have to make sure that the communities engage and are part of that conversation. And when the female teachers come, again, back to social capital, not alone. You can't send one female from the city into a town to say be alone. In fact, Judy was just telling me we got to work in clusters where we take 2 chiefdoms that are close to each other and have at least 5 or 6 teachers, make sure they are coming together, have a very distinct identity, and have a deal with the communities. In that way, the girls begin to see, and I say this a lot about when I talk about girls' education and empowerment of girls in general, because, by the way, this is one of the first groups. This is why we know this is a fantastic group where none of your questions was, what about the boys? That's a question we get a lot. What about the boys? But it was like, who cares? But the change is going to come from when you can show, not just tell. We have to have females. We have to build a female infrastructure. We have to have that girl who made it to 10th grade work with other girls so they can show. You can actually begin to show the change in the community. That's how you're going to bring about the change. And that's why it cannot be done in isolation. It cannot be just the 5 best performing girls. It has to be how you build the groups of girls within the communities over time.
And this comes from that model Judith talks about a lot of treating the girl as a client, right? So, and if you think about female teachers, what were female teachers 10 years ago? They were those girls, right? And so creating an environment where we are approaching the girl as the client from the time that she is a small child to the time that she becomes that female teacher creates a different type of culture, right? And on question 2, I just want to say I hope that today's panel helped to create a more kind of complex lens over the idea of simplifying narratives, right? And I think one of the most simple narratives that we hear a lot is this kind of idea that fathers don't want their girls to go to school, brothers don't want their girls to go to school, and communities don't support girls' education. And it's never that simple, right? So to close, I would like one word, if you could wave your magic wand, and give girls everywhere. Oh, we have one more question. Then we'll wave a magic wand.
Yeah. Hello, I'm called Josephine, and I come from Rwanda. I'm here in New York as a Mandela Washington Fellow. I'm doing my fellowship at Girl Scouts. My question goes to both Judith Bruce and Chernor. Oftentimes we consider education just as formal education, but when we think back home in our African context, we've always had education that is more informal and more meaningful in our societies. So what is, in your own opinion, what do you think about access to information in terms of education as a whole to girls back home? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question and congratulations on your fellowship. Look, I think everything we've talked about, and you're right, we've not spelled it out like that, but we're both big fans of non-formal education. In fact, a lot of our investment is around alternative pathways and thinking about it. As Judith said, not to focus too much on the bricks and mortar, and I think it's pointing out, again, it's alluding to the point you're making that it's not just about, having a school and the school structure. In fact, this female infrastructure that we're talking about is part of this non-formal education structure that needs to be built across. And that's been the bedrock of a lot of our African societies. You know, here you're talking about, for example, preschool education and, the formalized preschool education. But in our villages, when we were born, this was already part of the fabric of our societies. We all went, there was a local daycare because the one woman or two women in the communities will take care of the kids and they will teach us how to sing, they will teach us the folklore. This was part of preschool education, but again, it's not been recognized as such. So I think what we advocate for in the work that we do, in the things that we fund and in the programs that we work with across the world is really around how do we create and not only be obsessed with, because oftentimes for girls, once they drop out of school, it's almost like a death sentence. That's it. You're out of the infrastructure. So what we, again, push in for is how do you create alternatives and how do you make sure that those alternatives are responding to the needs in that community and can help that girl to survive and thrive irrespective.
I can answer both your question and your question in one. Probably be helpful. You're from Rwanda, where we've worked, and actually Rwanda has been the first country to do what I think should be done if I had my magic wand. We proposed something called the 12-year-old check-in, which meant that recognizing how dramatically and completely girls' lives go off track in the run-up to puberty, that you would take a year, the year that represented the year at which at least 10% of the girls were dropped out of school. So in the case of Rwanda, it's 11. And so Rwanda is implementing nationwide, not without hiccups, everything has hiccups, an 11-year-old check-in. What I would wish for, and certainly in every country we're working in, is what we call a 10-year-old check-in, that all the 10-year-old girls in the most affected communities, beginning there, would be in a girls' club for that entire year. The community would support, that would include financial literacy, the health information, the social participation. Remember, girls don't know they belong to a country. One of the things about school is it's the only time someone says someone other than your family wants you somewhere. We need to have more plate times that they're wanted somewhere. Across an entire year, going at least once a week to on a campaign, the way they do vaccinations. This is a social vaccine. Imagine doing that for 3 or 4 years. Then all the 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 14-year-olds in that place. This would be a tremendous support to school, both staying in it and getting back onto it. So it's integral to the education goal. But the education goal, as I think we've underscored, does not stand apart from the poverty alleviation and justice goal. So that's what I do. I would basically, every country would find the age with the information, and all the girls of that age for that year, very easy to explain, by the way. You don't have to take Susie and not Mary. Everybody gets in, and beginning with the most challenged and isolated communities who need that social density anyway. Why not build it through these girls?
Chernor, magic wand,
How do
every
you-
girl,
How do
alleviate
How do
poverty.
you follow that? How do you match that, right? That's
In
like,
one word.
Yeah. God. I would say, to use a phrase that was made popular in this country, it's the economy is stupid. I would say to think about girls as economic agents and to help girls with the tools. I mean, within Judith's structure, it's one of the things when we have a tool at the Pop Council. It's called an asset exercise. We ask our partners by what age should a girl have this assets, and the assets are listed as different things you can have: a place to go, a school, 5 friends, and everything. Across communities around the world, and I've done this in at least 4 continents around the world. I've done this, trained partners around the world. Across communities, the things people are most resistant to when it comes to girls, it's having access to money. It will surprise you. It's the thing people react the most to. You can say, what information should girls have, by what age? They always push the money, assets, and resources to when she's much older. And then you come back and ask them, but by what age will you or will girls in this community need or have an emergency where they will have the need for money or some resources or assets that requires money or that requires some financial intelligence or things like that. And when you push them, they will say, oh yeah, by age 8, 9, 10, they will have already been having all these shocks in their lives, especially in poor communities where they need the resources. And I think that's the paradigm in the societies that we live in, and that's the problem. It's that the society is structured in a way to keep girls away from financial assets and financial resources. And the magic wand that I will wave will be to solve this problem, is to give girls financial education and give them access to financial resources within their community early enough, and I think that can help to make a big difference.
Thank you. Okay, Judith Bruce, Population Council, Chernor from Purposeful Productions. Thank you guys so much for being with us.